It's going to be sitting down.
And we've got this message from the It's very short.
Oh, it is.
Who's going to be looking? What a question. Does he know me, Gabriel? Firstly, I must admit something, that this is the earliest I've ever come, even to our own events, not even associated with anybody else. When we say 8 or 8:15, we get going by 8:30. It's called Israel-Irish time, but I see you're still on the old general mean time, so but that's changing Thursday night as well. I know I'm down to propose a vote of thanks to Yankee, but I did receive this yesterday from Her Excellency the Irish Ambassador, who cannot be here with us tonight. So I'll read this out briefly, and then I'll get back on after Yankee and propose the vote of thanks. It gives me great pleasure to send greetings to the Israel branch of the Jewish Historical Society of England and members of the Israel-Ireland Friendship League on the occasion of the lecture by Yankee Bachler, Chairman of the Jewish Historical Society of Ireland. Ireland is strongly committed to the study of the Holocaust and related events. This is reflected in, for example, government funding of the Holocaust Education Trust Ireland. Ireland is also a full member of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance since 2011. And we have excellent relations with Yad Vashem here in Jerusalem, which I visited most recently just 2 weeks ago. Unfortunately, I am prevented by other commitments from joining you this evening, but I extend good wishes for what I am sure will be an interesting evening. Alison Kelly, Ambassador of Ireland to Israel.
Ladies and gentlemen, with your permission, I will do this talk sitting down. I recently have had a bit of surgery, and getting up and sitting down is not good for my constitution. If you can't hear, I will use the mic. If you can hear, I'll continue without. Irish political leader Eamon de Valera had an unrealistic and over-romanticized vision of comely maidens dancing at the crossroads.
Absolutely.
He envisaged Ireland as a politically, economically, and culturally independent rural haven free from the corrupting influences of Britain and of industrialism. And while this vision drove de Valera's electoral successes in 1932 and 1933, it soon became clear that Ireland's anti-industrial policies were a disastrous failure. Fortunately, Ireland's Minister of Industry and Commerce, Sean Lemass, had a more realistic vision. He wanted to bring in factories, investors, managers, experts from industrialized countries such as the UK, Germany, France, Czechoslovakia, and Belgium. Of course, there were several conditions to be met. Only industries that could create employment in the west of Ireland would be considered. Only new industries that posed no threat to existing Irish industries would be considered, and only people regarded as offering specific manufacturing processes that were new to Ireland would be allowed into the country. There was one particular area of industry that fitted Lemass's vision like a glove: the schmutter trade, also known as the rag trade or the textile industry. And traditionally, Jews all over Europe were involved in the schmutter trade. I'm sure I'm not the only person here in the room whose parents, grandparents in Europe were involved in the schmutter trade. In Dublin, Jewish businessman Marcus Witztom was also in the schmutter trade. He was born in Poland, spent some years in Argentina and Belgium, before coming to Dublin, where he co-owned a shop selling Viennese textiles. When Witztom got wind of Lemass's quest for European industries to relocate to the west of Ireland, he spotted a unique convergence of circumstances. As a businessman with contacts in Europe's schmutter trade, Witztum knew he could help guide Lemass in the direction of potential textile industry candidates in Europe that did not compete with existing industries. And as a Jew, Witztum was acutely aware of the growing plight of the Jews of Europe since Hitler became Chancellor in 1933. Witztum also knew that the biggest challenge facing the Jews of Germany and later of Austria and Czechoslovakia was not getting out of these countries. The challenge was to find a country that would take them in. When US President Roosevelt convened the Evian International Conference in 1938 to discuss the refugee crisis of Jews trying to leave Germany, country after country cried crocodile tears over the plight of the Jews, while explaining that they could not possibly take in any Jews. The Irish delegate stated with impeccable logic, sure, no one came to the rescue of Ireland during the famine, so why should the Jews get special treatment now? And indeed, the Irish government took extraordinary measures to keep Jewish refugees out of Ireland. Jewish parliamentarian Robert Briscoe, a future Lord Mayor of Dublin who was close to De Valera, inundated the Department of Justice with requests to allow named individuals to seek refuge in Ireland. And he was assured that everything was being done to help. Robert's late son, Joe Briscoe, once told me that he was glad that his father was no longer alive when Irish state papers were released showing that government ministers and officials had consistently lied to his father during this entire period. Marcus Witztom was very aware that Ireland was rigidly maintaining its closed-door policy against Jewish refugees. But he was also intimately knowledgeable about the favorable conditions that Ireland had to offer textile industries from overseas, Irish social and wage standards, protective tariffs, quota restrictions. He knew all this stuff. Witztom came up with a daring plan that combined a solution to both challenges at the same time, finding suitable candidate industries to relocate in Ireland and helping Jewish refugees find refuge in Ireland. In 1935-36, Witztom joined Lemass's head hunting commission to promote employment in the west of Ireland. Another member of the commission was Senator John Eddie Macklin, an industrialist who was close to Lemass. One of Macklin's companies delivered material for new factories, and Macklin used his vast network of political contacts, we would say protectia, to recommend where new enterprises should be located. When the Council of German Jewry sent a memorandum to the Irish government in 1936 regarding the possibility of Jewish refugee industrialists contributing to the Irish economy, Witztom made certain that Lemass responded in the affirmative. Witztom now started visiting Europe regularly, often with Lemass and Macklin in tow. What they did not know is that Witztom was using guile and chutzpah to navigate Lemass's head hunting commission exclusively in the direction of Jewish-owned businesses. Witztom's first success was in Paris, where Henri Orbach owned a small hat factory, Les Modes Modernes. Modern fashion? In the late 1920s, even before Hitler came to power, Orbach's sister Sophie and her husband Serge Philipson were strolling through a Berlin park when two German brown shirts shoved Sophie into some bushes. On the spot, Serge decided they would move to Paris, and his brother-in-law Orbach invited Serge to join Les Modes Modernes. When Witztum came knocking on Orbach's door to persuade him to relocate his hat factory to the west of Ireland, Orbach sent his brother-in-law Serge to Ireland on a reconnaissance and feasibility mission. Meanwhile, in Ireland, the Galway Industrial Development Association, GIDA, had just failed to secure a new factory that would have employed 50 people. Now, a factory for 50 people doesn't sound very much to us. But in those days, 50 people to be in employment was massive in Ireland of the 1930s. And the failure to secure the new factory was due to the lack of suitable premises in Galway. So when the GIDA heard that there was a prospect of Galway hosting a French hat factory, they were determined that Galway would not lose out again. Future President Erskine Hamilton Childers, son of Irish Republican Robert Erskine Childers, who was executed during the Irish Civil War, was secretary of the National Agricultural and Industrial Development Association. He pushed hard for Galway to be chosen as the site for the hat factory. Serge Philipson visited Galway and reported enthusiastically back to Orbach in Paris. Galway, he said, presented the opportunity of a lifetime. The deal was sealed. It was agreed that Serge himself would oversee the establishment of Les Modes Modernes hat factory in Galway for a period of 5 years before handing over to an Irish manager. Because Serge's wife Sophie insisted on staying in Paris with her widowed mother Augusta and their daughter Rachel, Serge spent 1 week a month in Paris with them and the other 3 weeks in Galway. Every holidays, his wife and daughter joined him in Galway. When the establishment of the hat factory was announced officially in April 1937, 2/3 of the £60,000 capital, it's quite a lot, came from the Orbach group, the rest from local investors. The building materials for the factory, of course, were supplied by Senator Macklin. Another investor in the Galway hat factory was Edmund Clessants, a prominent Catholic politician and former Belgian senator. Witztom probably knew Clessants from when he lived in Antwerp. Witztom, Macklin and Orbach were among the directors of the Irish Les Modes Modernes. While the hat factory was under construction on the northeastern edge of Galway, hat production started in mid-August 1937 in temporary premises on Eyre Square, some of you might know. A showcase in Dublin's St Stephen's Green gave people an opportunity to see what the Galway factory had to offer. At the official opening ceremony in Galway's old railway hotel in July 1938, Minister Lemass proudly announced that Irish industries were, I quote, capable of facing comparison with industries in other countries. Michael Brown, the Bishop of Galway, did more than just bless the new enterprise at the opening ceremony. He gave Les Modes Modernes a significant marketing boost by publicly announcing from the pulpit that his lady parishioners should henceforth wear hats instead of tichels, instead of headscarves, when they came to church. Talk about product placement. The workers in the new factory needed training, and Witztom knew exactly where to find the experts he needed in Europe. And with the full backing of the Irish government, he legitimately secured visas for Jewish technicians, supervisors, designers, and people to train the locals. But he went a step further, and he did something that sets him apart from any other Jew in Ireland. He saw an opportunity of increasing the number of Jews receiving visas for Ireland by making sure that among the experts were Jews from a professional background who had little or no experience in industry. In fact, he probably brought in a Jewish non-expert for every legitimate Jewish expert. After a summer holiday with his family near the Belgian-German border in 1939, Serge begged his wife Sophie to return with him to Ireland. She was reluctant to leave her mother in Paris, since she knew that her mother would not get an Irish visa. Even Witztum wouldn't have managed that. In August 1939, Sophie, daughter Rachel, and other family members left Paris for Normandy. Following Nazi Germany's occupation of France in July 1940, the Philipson family joined Serge's brother Robert in the French Free Zone. August 1942, Sophie's sister Ella and her husband Ernest, their daughter Ruth, Serge's brother Robert, and sister Esther were all arrested by French police and deported, never to be heard of again. And in early 1943, Sophie, her mother Augusta, and Rachel joined Henri Orbach in the Hotel Victoria in Cannes. They were denounced, arrested, sent to Drancy transit camp, and on to a Nazi death camp in Poland. And the sole survivor of the Orbach-Philipson family was Serge's daughter Rachel, who managed to hide during the war. She returned to liberated Paris in August 1944, and her father Serge in Ireland persuaded his friend, the French commercial councillor in Dublin, Monsieur Lestocky, to personally travel to Paris to organize Rachel's repatriation to Ireland. Father and daughter were reunited in Dublin in June 1945, 6 years since they had last seen one another. Rachel married in 1951 and emigrated to Montreal in 1954. Sluggish demand for hats led to the eventual liquidation of Les Modes Modernes in the 1970s. Serge went on to become an art collector and was elected to the board of directors of the National Gallery of Ireland. He was never acknowledged in Ireland, but he was awarded the Légion d'honneur because of his involvement with the Alliance Française. We move on to the second of Marcus Witztom's success stories. Early 1939, Witztom was instrumental in bringing to Ireland Hugo Reiniger and Co., a hat manufacturer in Chomutov, a German-speaking town in the Sudetenland of Czechoslovakia. There was great excitement in Castle Bar, County Mayo, when it was announced that a new factory for the millinery trade was to be established. Western Hats, as it was called, was registered in Ireland as a public company with a nominal capital of £100,000. One of the chief promoters was our friend, the Belgian Senator Klessens, and in May 1939 he was given the honour of digging the first sod of turf in Castle Bar. The board of directors of Western Hats included Macklin and Witztom. Construction began on a 9-acre site. The factory took 6 months to build and was the first building of its kind west of the River Shannon. The 350-foot red brick chimney remained a local landmark for Castle Bar and its surroundings up to the 1980s. Everything ran on natural sources: turf, water, steam, and daylight. And this was the first factory in Ireland built to use those natural resources. The last machines arrived from Belgium 1 week before Belgium was invaded by the Germans. On the last Friday in August 1940, the factory boiler was put into commission for the first time. With its modern lines and its green latticed windows, the Castlebar hat factory was one of the most advanced in the country and would become one of the largest employers in the region, creating employment for hundreds of local people. And many Castlebar families grew up on stories of family members with fond memories of the factory. There was even a Western Hats football team that competed in a local league. Soon, shops in Castlebar were selling an excellent range of hats made by locals out of the very finest of materials in the latest style and shade and at a very reasonable price. In Castlebar's Western Hats factory, as in Galway, Witztom weaved his magic. Once again, many of the so-called experts that Witztom brought to Ireland were professional Jews with little experience in running a factory. Fred Klepper was a marketing manager who'd moved from the Sudetenland to Prague. He heard about the hat factory in Castlebar and received a work permit even though he had no actual skills in the making of hats. But with their Irish visas in their hands, Fred and his wife Gretel and their daughter Doris, who died just last year, reached Castlebar in the summer of 1939. Fred began working in the spinning department and the family moved to an area of Castlebar that the locals called Little Jerusalem, similar to an area in Dublin with the same name. Here are some lines from a Holocaust poem called The Hat Factory by Irish poet Paul Durcan. And what if you were a hatter and you married a hatter and all your sons and daughters worked as hatters and you inhabited a hat house all full of hats, 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 the apotheosis of an ancient craft. And I think of all the nationalities of Israel and of how each always clings to his native hat, his priceless and movable roof, his hat which is the last and first symbol of a man's slender foothold on this earth. Delightful. Meanwhile, Marcus Witztom was busy negotiating for a third factory to move from Europe to Ireland. Emil Hirsch, a wealthy Jewish Viennese businessman, took over an unsuccessful textile factory and renamed it Hirsch Bandfabrik, the Hirsch Ribbon Factory. After the 1938 Anschluss, Hirsch was naturally interested in relocating with his factory and his family to safer pastures. When he learned from Witztom in late 1938 that Ireland was offering incentives to foreign industrialists to set up businesses in Ireland, Hirsch expressed an interest. At first it was suggested that the ribbon factory might locate to Galway, but Hirsch decided that the damp climate was unsuitable for ribbons. The alternative suggestion was Longford. So we've had Galway, we've had Castlebar, and now Longford. When local interest groups in Longford heard that there was a possibility of bringing over a ribbon factory, they invited Witztom and Macklin to visit the town to assess local conditions. Longford had a lot going for it. It had road, rail and canal transport, it had water from the Camlin River, and it had a plentiful supply of employees. Erskine Childers once again makes a valuable contribution. By now he is the secretary of the Federation of Irish Manufacturers, and he used his Department of Industry and Commerce contacts to help secure Longford for the ribbon factory. And it was Childers who proudly announced to the Longford Development Association that he had persuaded Macklin and Witztom to choose Longford. Childers also used his contacts in the Department of Defense to secure a vacant section of Connolly Army Barracks in Longford town. Construction began in late 1938, and in March 1939, the Department of Finance signed a 30-year lease agreement with Macklin and Witztom for the Longford site. Hirsch, he's still in Vienna, had to pay considerable bribes to Nazi and SS officials, and he even spent a few days in prison. Yet amazingly, he became the only Jew in Austria ever to successfully ship his entire factory out of Austria after the Nazi Anschluss. The stock of ribbons and 21 looms arrived safely in Longford in May 1939, and Hirsch Ribbons was incorporated as a limited company in July. The board of directors, as you can guess already, included Mackelin, Witztom, Childers, and Hirsch. Hirsch Ribbons was the first industrial establishment in Longford and remained an influential economic and social institution for almost 4 decades. Hirsch himself became the managing director, and his son Robert, who spoke excellent English, was appointed general manager. To facilitate communication between the mainly German-speaking managers and the local staff, the company recruited a local Irish girl, Ruby Burns, who'd studied in Germany and spoke fluent German. Ruby was later to become Robert's wife, and their 2 children, Desmond and Jenny, both worked in the factory and later in the Dublin sales office. Hirsch lived in Dublin and ran the business from 24 Suffolk Street, which just happened to be Witztom's office. You see, and I only learned this relatively recently, the 3 factories that Witztom helped bring to Ireland, Western Hats in Castlebar, Hirsch Ribbons in Longford, and Les Modes Modernes in Galway, all had their headquarters in the same place in Witztom's own office. In other words, Witztom personally was able to coordinate production in all 3 sites. And once the Hirsch Ribbon factory became operational in October 1939, Witztom made sure that the first orders to be processed went to the hat factories in Galway and Castlebar. As in Galway and Castlebar, there was an urgent need to train workers for the Longford factory. Hirsch and Witztom leveraged this need to secure the immediate granting of visas for employees of the Austrian Hirsch Ribbon factory to come to Ireland. And again, Witztom successfully brought in non-specialists. The adventures and misadventures of some of these non-specialists brought over by Witztom I recorded in the best-selling memoir, which has already been introduced to you earlier by our German, Last Waltz in Vienna by George Clare, or as he was known then, Georg Klar. When George's father Ernst lost his job in his Viennese bank because he was a Jew, the non-Jewish owner of associated Austrian ribbon factories put him in contact with the Jewish competitor, Emil Hirsch. And at Hirsch's insistence, Ernst, who had never stepped foot in a factory in his life, was deemed an expert who was urgently needed in the Longford ribbon factory. George and his parents followed Witztom's instructions and went to Berlin to collect their visas from the passport and visa section at the Irish legation. Earlier, we mentioned Ireland's strenuous measures to keep out Jewish refugees. In Berlin, this policy was implemented with great zeal by the Irish consul, a notorious anti-Semite called Charles Bewley. Bewley lied to the class, claiming that he'd received no instructions from Dublin regarding their visas. Witztom and Hirsch bombarded the Irish authorities with demands that the class be given their visas. In the meantime, Ernst accepted a position with his former employer in their French bank branch. The timing of the sudden emergence of the Irish visas for Stella and George Klar was hugely cynical. The date, the 10th of November 1938, the morning after Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass, which my late father witnessed as a 15-year-old. And the visas had been issued days earlier. Bewley had simply withheld them. A quick aside about Bewley and Kristallnacht. A few years ago, the curator of the Berlin Jewish Museum came up with a novel idea. She asked all the countries that had a diplomatic presence in Berlin at the time of Kristallnacht to send the reports from their Berlin diplomats about the pogrom. Even the Italian, Spanish, and Japanese diplomats expressed shock at what they witnessed. And the sole foreign diplomat stationed in Berlin, who sent back a report exonerating the Nazis and condemning the Jews, was, yes, you guessed it, Ireland's Charles Bewley. Bewley's shameful report was prominently displayed in the Berlin Museum. And the curator told me that when they started collecting these reports, she had no idea about Ireland. To anyone like some of us here familiar with the history of the Jews of Ireland, Bewley is no surprise. This is the island where during the 1930s, self-styled inquisitors like Father Dennis Fahey, who went on to found the anti-Semitic Maria Duce movement, worked assiduously to disclose Jewish conspiracies. This is the island where in 1943 Oliver James Flanagan made his maiden speech in the Irish Parliament. He accused the Jews of crucifying Jesus and of crucifying the Irish people every day. I quote, "There is one thing that Germany did, and that was to rout the Jews out of their country. Until we rout the Jews out of this country, it doesn't matter a hair's breadth what orders you make. Where the bees are, there is the honey, and where the Jews are, there is the money." How many parliamentarians walked out of the chamber when they heard this gutter talk from Flanagan? Not a single one. Back to the class. Stella and her son George traveled to Longford, ostensibly to work at the Hirsch ribbon factory. George may have spent a few days there. George even roomed with Robert Hirsch for a while. Through Witztom's intervention, George's father Ernst, who was now in Paris, eventually received his Irish visa, but he made the tragic decision to remain in his Paris bank job. Stella Clark missed her husband so much that she left the safety of